because I don't trust YouTube, as you shouldn't, because YouTube always says you're live and then you're not. So refreshing my screen. And we're in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Because I don't know what time of the day you're watching this. In the morning, in the afternoon, or the night, or in zombie mode. Zombie mode doesn't mean you're dead, but it means you're not watching it live. Aside of that stupid joke, my public service announcement of the day, as I do every day, the microphone so you can hear me well. Wear your fucking mask. Let me repeat. Wear your fucking mask. Don't be an asshole. And now, the polite way of explaining it. The mask doesn't protect you, you idiot. It protects others from you. That's the reason you wear it. You wear the mask so your blood doesn't get into somebody else's faces or whatever. Avoid contagion. You do that to protect other people, to protect your elders, to protect your children. If somebody tells you children don't get infected, kids don't get infected, that's a lie. Everybody can get infected. So please be careful, care for others, wear the mask. And last important thing, if you don't want to wear your mask because you think you're more important than anybody else, you don't care about their lives, chronic illnesses, or their deaths, possible deaths that you can cause, leave this fucking channel now. I don't want you here. And that's not a joke. After that, my polite way of saying things. Hello, Pat, how are you?
Fine. Just absorbing your public health message. Yeah.
I told you before we started it wasn't going to be polite.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
I'm sick of the idiots, to be honest. I'm just sick of the idiots, who don't care for others and think they're more important and their freedom matters more, than other people. They can get killed. So it's come from being polite to just, I can't stand it anymore. I'm just going to call a spade and fuck it. And if they don't like it, there's the door. How are you? How's things?
I'm fine. Fine. Yeah. Busy. Yeah.
But that's not a change. You've been busy for the last what?
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. On the shit money they pay you for comics in Britain, it's not surprising I'm busy. But yeah, but I'm enjoying it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you miss? Well, I was going to ask you how's things in your neck of the woods, but you're actually closer than people think. So you're more or less like we are here. Things are fine. You're not confined at home. We gotta be careful with the COVID, and that's it, right? That's how it's for you guys.
Yeah, it's not too bad. When we were on the coast, we had a really big roof terrace. So it's like walking around a prison yard or something. You just go around and around. It's a little more difficult here, but it's not a complete shutdown. So you're allowed out in the hours of daylight, and you're allowed into bars up until this is in Andalusia. The cutoff is 6 o'clock or something like that. So I've got to do some daytime drinking, really.
Not here in Catalonia. We've been bars have been closed. I think it's been 3 weeks already, because it depends on the region, as you know. Each one can decide on it, as it's a federal country in Spain, so they can all decide. And Catalonia decided 3 weeks ago that bars and restaurants would be closed, and I think the rest of Spain is joining. Other regions, Galicia, mine, closed the bars before too, but other regions are joining now because they're seeing that the numbers in Catalonia are going down, while others are going up. So people think maybe closing the bars would be a good idea. I don't know if it's or not, but whatever they can try, whatever they can try that is good for us. Is there? Imagine I'm your doctor. I'm going to change my name. My name is now Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Nice to meet you, Pat. This is my syringe. I pop it into you and I say, screw it. Pandemic is over. We're safe. What's the first thing that you've been missing for months to do that you could do?
Travel, I think. And, we launched SpaceWarp comic, and we've had to do it virtually and digitally. And so we kind of missed having a physical launch. In other words, comic shops, signings. I think we were going to, hire a room in a pub or something, so we can actually meet fans.
Absolutely.
But my feeling is, I think we're another 6 months away at least. And whilst what you're saying, I'm sure is absolutely valid, because I don't want to be thrown off your channel, especially this early. I think there are also agendas here, so I think they are going to make the best of it, or the worst of it, perhaps. And I think it's going to go on for some time.
Yeah, I agree. Whoever thinks, we're going to have a vaccine in December and this is going to be solved, like, no, not a chance. First, no. Even if you have the vaccine, today everybody's going crazy because Pfizer said, we have a vaccine that is 90%. Like, you know how much a 10% is? A 10% of people that the vaccine won't work on, that's a lot. And second, one thing is to have one, and second is the distribution. When is people going to be able to get it? So between one thing and the other, I agree with you. I don't think 6 months. I think 6 months is a very kind estimation, to be honest.
Very kind. But also, listen. Every vaccine that I've ever heard of, right, normally goes through a period of 2 or 3 years experimentation, guinea pigs and so forth. And if you go back to World War One, the end of World War One, and I'm sorry to say it was called Spanish flu because that's far from the truth. Yeah. It would probably be, if anything, more likely American flu or flu. But in fact, it may not even have been flu. And there are two. What shall we say? They're not conspiracy theories. They are information about the 1918 flu.
Yes.
And those two streams of information are not conspiracy theories. They are fact. And you know what? I'm allowed to swear on this, aren't I? I didn't.
Absolutely, you are. You started it.
Well, I didn't. Well, I heard you swearing earlier, so that's great. That's. I didn't know about that. About these two. One of them is that aspirin played a major role in the number of deaths between 1918 and 1920 for the pandemic then. In other words, overdosing on aspirin and even the use of aspirin. Bayer, the big pharma company, they lost their patent in 1917. And so they aggressively pushed it subsequently as the solution for this quote unquote influenza.
Yeah.
And the theory, one strong theory is that it's actually bacterial pneumonia. Anyway, so that was one. In other words, so I didn't know about this. And you feel, well, if Bayer and their fucking aspirin were responsible for millions of deaths, why haven't they been called out on it? And why didn't I know that before? And then you have the second theory. Oh, and by the way, on that first one, it's not conspiracy theory. I looked it up online, and you've got lots of acceptable academics who say it. Why we should always go for academics anyway, fuck knows, because I think they've betrayed us an awful lot of the time. But here they are. They're all saying this is correct. Some of them say, well, aspirin played a small part, or aspirin's played a big part, etc. And then you have another one, and you can see why I'm talking about it because of the news today about vaccines. So the other theory, and again, this is, it's not conspiracy theory, it's not David Icke, who in the UK, if people want to dismiss something, they say, oh, it's just David Icke. You know, that's a kind of a phrase, which is a bit unfair. Anyhow, the other one was that a vaccine was issued to American troops in, let's say, 1917, and it did not have the desired effect. And as they came into Europe, etc., it spread this possibly a virus, possibly bacterial pneumonia. Yeah. But the point is, I didn't know about any of this stuff. And given its relevance for today, I don't know about you, I think it would be quite awful if in 50 years' time, or probably 100 years' time, the way things are normally done, they say, about COVID. Well, in fact, it was all down to A, B, and C. Yeah, we didn't tell them at the time. So I think what happened in 1918 is very relevant, because to begin with, when COVID was first announced, they were saying, oh, this is going to be like the pandemic of 1918, which is far from the truth. If you look at the figures for 1918 to 1920, very, very different. And so I personally think the media and the academics who have supported the media have a hell of a lot to answer for. Anyway, so that's my rant on this.
No, it's not a rant. It's not a rant. Every single government, especially the ones who said since the beginning they were absolutely ready for it, have a lot to answer for. And I'm going to quote Bill Gates of all people, because they are the crazies who say Bill Gates, 5G, the chips in your head and all that crap. But Bill Gates, like 5 years ago, remember, he has a foundation and works a lot with his wife, to end some very important illnesses in Africa and other parts of the world. He literally said in a TED talk, pandemics happen every certain amount of time. No government is spending money in this. It's going to come sooner or later, 5, 10, 15 years. It's going to happen. And it's going to explode in our faces because governments are not doing their job. They are just not. They're looking the other way. So the moment it happens, boom.
Yeah.
And it happened. And I am not a fan of Bill Gates. I think he's one of the biggest grifters and burglars in history. It tells us what he's always done in front of Microsoft. But by the end of the day, he was right. He saw it coming because he was dealing with that in his foundation.
Bill Gates is on my, all the villains that I feature in SpaceWarp, right? All the villains are always based on people I either know personally, which is usually best, because I hate them even more, and I have very good reason to hate them. Or when that doesn't work, I often base them on various tycoons, billionaires, and so on. Because my theory, which I don't think is particularly revolutionary, is I don't think by definition there is any such thing as a good billionaire. I think there are only bad billionaires. I know someone's going to say, but what about so-and-so who was the Mother Teresa of billionaires? Well, I hate Mother Teresa as well. So
let me add to that. Mother Teresa wasn't good.
Hey,
if you scratch a bit and you find she wasn't a good person.
No, she certainly wasn't. And
let me clarify. And if you guys don't want to, this as Pat said, this is not conspiracy. This is facts. Just scratch a bit in her history, and she was evil, literally. But anyway, sorry.
No. We must come back to Mother Teresa. I featured her indirectly in it must be at least 2 or 3 stories. And you know what? I still haven't gotten her out of my system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is because of the sheer nature of her evil, which if anyone isn't aware of it, and they say, what are you talking about? She was this wonderful woman. Well, you've got the German Stern magazine, which covered the feature, Where Are the Missing Millions? Have her consorting and approving of dictators like in Haiti and so on. And she, actually, we're back to the subject of aspirin here. She gave terminally ill patients in her Calcutta hospitals and hospices. She gave them aspirin. But when she was on her way out, she had the best hospital care money can buy. Yes. And we could let's move on. Bill Gates is on my.
We go back. Let's go back to Bill Gates.
I've got to. But you see, the thing is, I know he's a wrong 'un, but whenever I go in for these subjects, I like to really know my facts. So I better not talk about him because I've got to do some research first. And who knows? He may turn out to be this wonderful person, but I very much doubt it. Yeah.
Let me say it this way: the way I think about Bill Gates right now, and I've studied a lot of this history of Silicon Valley, how he stole from Apple and other people, because Windows is literally a carbon copy of the original Mac OS and many other things. That was Bill Gates at the beginning. And if you read shit, I forgot the title of the book. I will tell you later. The guy who made the biography of Steve Jobs also did a book about the original Silicon Valley, creators.
Yeah.
The guys who created Intel, the guys who created Apple, Microsoft, etc. And the portrait of Bill Gates during all that time, he was the only rich kid in the middle of guys who were in their fucking garages, and he was acting like the rich spoiled kid who just thought,
yeah,
that's the way I do things. I steal them. I don't need to create them. I steal them.
Yeah, he comes from a moneyed family, doesn't he? A family with all the conspiracy theory connections that any of us would want. And
the other side that I wanted to say is that what I think Bill Gates has been doing for the past few years, to be honest, what it looks like is, I don't know if because of his wife, who's also in charge of the foundation or what. I think he's in a way trying to amend for all his sins.
Right.
All the shit he knows he's done, because it needs a lot of shit. Having these foundations, they're curing, trying to cure malaria and all these things, and that's true. You can check it out. You can. They're doing amazing job, and he's pouring all his fortune on it. So
I've heard that, and the trouble is because I haven't gotten around to researching him properly. I've just made a mental note. I'm aware that there are allegations of, I think. Possible, what should we say, sterilization, strongly persuading, I'm not sure that's quite the right word, Indian women to have sterilization. And I know there have been allegations about vaccines as well. Now, the trouble is, probably like yourself or like anyone who really wants to get to the truth, to really make sense of it, I've probably got to read 2 or 3 books that dovetail and have reasonably authoritative sources. But there is another side to that charitable foundation. And the trouble is, I'm at a disadvantage here, David, because I haven't looked him up. Because the trouble is, there's so many scumbags out there in the world.
That's true.
Who am I going to write about next? Yeah, so it's a problem. And I mean, just to give you an example of how this works for me, it was come as no surprise to you or indeed anyone who reads my stuff, was that I grew up in a very sort of what you call Irish Catholic family. And so when I was writing Requiem Vampire Night, I thought, right, it's set in hell, so I had all kinds of scumbags in there. And I had one based on this priest I knew who was called Canon Burroughs. And the artist, Olivier Ledoux, who, anyone who's seen Requiem was out, my God, he's such a brilliant artist. And he very rightly said to me, he said, Canon Burroughs is too small beer. You've got to go for someone big. And he said, let's go for Torquemada. In other words, and I said, well, I've already done Torquemada in 2000 AD in a series called Nemesis. And he said, no, this will be a different Torquemada. Equally evil and all the rest of it. So I think the point I'm making is, you have to have these larger than life villains to be interesting. So that's why I tend to go for famous people like Bill Gates in SpaceWarp. I think we featured, I'm just trying to find it now. We featured a character in Executioners who, let me see if I can find him. Yeah. Now this guy, I think you can see him down here somewhere in the middle. Now he was based on a combination of all the other Silicon Valley tycoons and people like the guy who owns PayPal and the guy who owns Amazon and so on. And so I spent ages researching them to really have. So as I say, it's a frustrating thing in a way, because it's best to go for people everyone's heard of, really iconic characters like Bill Gates or like Torquemada and so on. And it's no good, if I focus just on my local parish priest, it's not quite the same. It is to me, but it doesn't really cut it at the box office. So Olivia was quite right to say to me, no, don't make it Cannon Burrows, make it Torquemada.
And how, since you're talking about villains, how close to reality must they be? How relatable must they be as human beings for you to believe in them while you're writing them?
Well, I often actually use their speech pattern, their dialogue, and everything about them. Because the real things they say, you can't really argue with that, So, for example, I have a villain in the forthcoming Slaine story, which comes out at Christmas and is absolutely amazing artwork.
Who's drawing it?
Is it Leo Manco? I was Argentinian artist.
Yeah, Leonardo Manco. It can be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He's amazing. He's amazing.
Yeah. Well, his work on Slaine is just, God. Anyway, the villain in that story is a guy called Brutus, who, according to British mythology, was not just from Troy and the whole Greek legend of Troy. He was also Britain's first ruler. And no one's done a story on him. I can't believe it. In fact, I can't believe I haven't done one before. So Britain is named after Brutus. In other words, Britain was originally called the land of Brutus, or Brutania.
Brutania, yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, of course, that's a mythological version.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a great villain. So I thought, who am I going to base him on? Because obviously, there's only the myths and legends about this guy. But he's the ultimate imperialist, and so he's partly based, at least, on Winston Churchill. Who
I was going to say it. I'm sure. I was thinking all the time. He's going to mention Winston Churchill.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'd done that, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, I think there would have been an outcry. But I think people are gradually accepting that a man who saved Britain, single-handedly almost, if you like, was also responsible for famine and terrible crimes against people in Kenya, people in Ireland, people in India, and so forth. So it's long overdue. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose if I was ever to really develop the character of Brutus, I suppose I might show that there is a good and heroic side of him, as well as this contempt for what he would regard as lesser people. So I try to make them reasonably 3D, but at the same time, of course, in a comic book, you have to be pretty entertaining. And so a lot of the fun on this forthcoming Slaine, which I know Slaine readers will enjoy, is he has the most dysfunctional family. And I think this guy, he has a wife who, she's not a vampire, but in some ways she's worse. She feeds on ambrosia, which she gets from a wet nurse. I don't know if you know what a wet nurse is. Yeah. Okay, good. It saves me having to get too graphic. And so she looks about, I don't know, well, like Melania Trump, you know, looks very youthful, but and is at the same time very hard-faced. So that's his wife. Then he has a mad son who is too nuts, and so he has to keep him locked up. And then, worst of all, he has two sons who are pacifists. I can't think of anything worse for an imperialist than to have two sons who don't believe in war. So I'm having a lot of fun with that whole dynamic of the dysfunctional family. Mm.
Is Leo coloring it too or not?
Yeah, he was he was very nervous about coloring it, and his color system is great. It's absolutely spot on. But he was very nervous, and I think I made him more nervous. I think I make most artists nervous because there was so much at stake on those early episodes, and everything, I don't know, had to be dead right. And so I would say, what about this or that? You know, tweaking it a little bit. And then he took that on board, and then he became even more critical of his work, almost too critical, so that you get to that situation that you do with artists where you've got to rip the pages away from them and say, no, you can't do anything else to it. Leave them alone, you know? Yeah. So I think I've had to take a step back from and let him roll with the ball wherever, because it's not fair to him, and it's not fair to either of us financially, because, you know, because Slaine's not a creator-owned book, there has to be a point where you say, this is the amount of time I'm going to give this story. And Slaine's already had more than that period of time. Whereas if something's creator-owned, and in other words, if it sells well, you know, there's no ceiling to the thing. You can spend huge amounts of time on the character because it's worth it, because you want the character to be around in 5 or 10 years' time.
Yeah. So, and that's an interesting fact what you said about, you know, tweaking things. How much, when you are just a writer, how much do you have to avoid becoming the editor too, or the other way around? Or for you, it's just two sides of the same coin and just flow with it?
I think generally speaking, I think in my world, the writer is also usually what in cinema terms would be called the producer and director. In other words, you've got to see the thing through all the way. So that was certainly the case on SpaceWarp. In other words, I'm the writer and the editor of it, and also, if you like, the producer. Although my wife Lisa is very much the publisher of it. But so yeah, you've got to see it all the way through, and I think comics have become very streamlined. I would say a little bit like McDonald's. You know, in other words, you just knock them out, fast food, right? And I'm very hostile to that approach. So I once heard a 2000 AD writer saying, yeah, he just writes it, and then the lettering has nothing to do with him, the artist is nothing to do with him, and he doesn't do that other thing which I invariably do, which is I actually edit my story against the art. Now, there are drawbacks to that as well, but it means that the dialogue fits like a glove. But the lettering, when I started 2000 AD, the lettering was really important. And over the years, it's lost its brilliance as an art form. Now, you'll know, and your viewers will know about some of the really brilliant letterers, and the one I'm going to think of. Oh man, what a talent! The guy who lettered American Flag, Howard Chaykin's American Flag.
Ken Brusenack, yeah.
I know you. I knew you'd.
Yeah, because if you try to get Ken away from Howard will probably kill somebody. That's Chaykin. Brusenack is still with Chaykin, and he'll be forever. Like John Workman with Walter Simonson. Like they need to go together because they work like the synergy is perfect.
But you look at American Flag and you look at these, masses of words, and they're all beautifully aligned, and they're not crowding the artwork, and you have these great sound effects and everything, and you think, wow, Ken Brusenack, he's the man, he's amazing. And we lost a lot of that.
Let me show you one thing. Well, let me see if I can.
Yeah, that's American Flag, isn't it?
No, this is the shadow.
Oh, isn't the shadow? God. But it's Chaykin, yeah?
Yeah, it's Chaykin and Brusenack.
Right.
That's why I wanted to show it.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just looking at. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4. He's got about 8 or 9 pictures on that page. Yep. That's amazing.
Look at the sound effects. The way, because he's hypnotized at that moment, to love the shadow and how the balloons change shape and all that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm in awe. So when we, I got really fed up with really boring lettering. So on SpaceWarp, I'm going to give you you can see an example of the highest standard I was looking for. So you can see that there, I think.
Yeah.
I've got to get used to swinging it the right way. Yeah. This isn't very good. You can see I don't do this very often. Right. You can see that the kind of, I mean, up here, for example, we used Art Deco sort of boxes, with design on them. And each story, we have that kind of approach on. And I'm really delighted to say our readers have appreciated it. Because I was thinking otherwise, why the fuck am I doing this if they don't care? Because it's those extra touches that, I mean, it's like a soundtrack on a movie. You imagine, say, a classic film like The Graduate without the right soundtrack, Simon and Garfunkel and all the rest of it. So for me, the lettering is the same thing. It's really important, and it has to be a thing of beauty. So, but I'm very envious of Howard having Ken Brusenack.
But that's like people doesn't remember, and I always tell them to check why Alan Moore picked Todd Klein to do America's Best Comics, because he has the best possible lettering in the business aside of Ken and Workman. It's the only guy who can give each one of those books a completely different type of lettering specific to them. League was a certain way. Tom Strong was a certain way. Promethea was a certain way. Each one of those books have a personality in the lettering that was matching the art.
Yeah. And we've got, I think, our equivalent of Todd Klein in Britain. We have a British artist and letterer called Ken Reynolds, and he has done a really great job on, and really, I could probably, I must come back to him and ask him to do more and to reflect all those different styles that you're talking about. It really does make a difference. So so to come back to your general point, being the writer is not the end of the journey. There are exceptions, like, for example, I think when I was writing Charlie's War, Joe Cahoon's artwork was so sublime, was so perfect, that I didn't want to interfere in that process you know, I almost felt if I got too friendly with Joe, or we had too many conversations on the phone, or we met up, that somehow I might rock the boat. In other words, we had something that was perfection. And so I deliberately stepped back. And I think in a funny sort of way, I'm doing the same thing now on Slaine. You know, if an artist is really spot on, then you do have to step back.
Yes.
And then other times, of course, the artist will take on that kind of director role. So, for example, on Requiem, Olivier Ledoir is very much the kind of director and script editor, even, which I'm okay about, because I gave you the example of Torquemada.
Yeah.
But I'll give you another one. I had Mother Teresa in Hell, and I originally had a very abusive script, right, featuring her as a demonic pirate in Hell. And then I started to get cold feet, and I toned it down, which I very rarely do. But on this one, I thought, oh fuck, maybe I've gone too far, you know. So I toned all this Mother Teresa abuse down, and Olivia said, no. So he threw out my second version and kept to the first version, and I'm glad he did. So sometimes it will be the artist who will take on that kind of director role. Just looking at the side margin, you probably getting the same side margin as me. Chat. There's also
the questions in the chat and all that.
Yeah,
don't worry. I see them and I look at the watch to see when to start with the questions.
Okay.
What do you think makes the comics language or storytelling, whatever you prefer to call it, so different, so unique compared to everything else?
Oh, that's a big one, isn't it?
I have to do at least one.
Yeah. What makes it? I think we're closer to the streets than any other art form, any other creative media, with the possible exception of rock music. In fact, the notable exception of rock music. But in terms of the printed form and art form, we're really close to the streets. And so it also we can, I don't know, we can get away with a lot more even now, because people just say, oh, it's just comics. Long may you think that. Long may you think that.
Do you think when you write instinctively, do you think you're doing a symphony because of the up and downs, or as you said, it's rock music for you? You can drink and then talk.
Thanks. I think of it as a bit like a symphony, and but a symphony, well, probably prog rock, actually. Pink Floyd or something, you know. So kind of a mixture, a fusion of classical music and rock music, on the edge of heavy metal, perhaps. I think one of the things, but there is a shape and a pattern to it, and the pattern is something that I've always followed intuitively, but I think it's sometimes useful to see it confirmed technically by a what you might call a writing guru. And my particular writing guru is a guy called Robert McKee, who gives lectures all over the world and has written a book called Story. And, you know, I've been to one of his seminars and all that kind of stuff, and I really swear by him. But he makes the point that there should be this up and down, this crescendo, this beat, if you like, right? And he gives an example but basically he says if a scene starts one way, right? Let's say it starts with lots of happiness, then it's got to end by definition with lots of misery.
Yes.
Right? And if a scene starts with cruelty, let's say that's the value, then it should end with kindness. So that it takes you, you flip the thing. And he actually makes it quite almost mathematical. He talks about plus values and minus values. But I can think that there are a lot of comics where comic writers don't seem to be aware of those basic rules of plus and minuses. I know it's an easy target now, but fuck it, I don't care. Vertigo, you would have some great Vertigo stories, but you would also have ones where nothing bloody changes, you know? In other words, you start the scene and they're talking, and you end the scene and they're talking. And there has been the plus and the minus values haven't changed. And I think sometimes people get away with it because of who they are. Now, J.K. Rowling, for example, powerful as her Harry Potter books are, my wife Lisa said, "Oh, you've got to read one of her cop stories." And I sat down to read this, and God, I was foaming at the mouth. What is this shit, you know? There's just one whole chapter where nothing changes. And obviously, because she's J.K. Rowling, you know, people will say, well, it doesn't matter. You know, in other words, you kind of pass through the process that the rest of us have to endure. And so, yeah, it's surprising that those very basic rules that Robert McKee calls it the principles of storytelling. Now, when I was very much involved with what you might call pulp fiction, I used to sometimes annoy the more aesthetic comic artists by referring to it as the formula, because I love they're saying, oh, it's not a formula, it's an art. Yeah, the principles are like a formula. If you get the formula right, it's like the magic ingredients in a cake. If you're a good chef, you know how to mix things up. And
music is math. Symphonies are math. Comics are math. Every art form is math. I always insist, there's a reason why they were schools back in the day. The schools were called arts and sciences because they've always been related. And when somebody tries to separate them, like, no, every art form, it's math in the end.
Yeah. And if you look at Robert McKee's book, I think he actually has graphs and things, and you know, which actually show all that kind of, you know, the for example, well, the famous one, I think, in a 3-act drama, the darkest hour is always just before the final dawn. So you always have that point where the hero or heroine is really in the biggest trouble yet, but it has to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then just at the end, you're thinking, oh my God, he or she is never going to get out of this. And then suddenly you have the dawn and all well again. And there are, I think there's a trend in comics, which is fair enough as long as it's recognized for what it is, which is what I would call art house movies. You know what I mean? You have graphic novels which are akin to art house because they don't have that what would be seen as Hollywood rules of drama. So if you have a French film, for example.
No, but it makes perfect sense because that's healthy for the art form in a way, because if you didn't have that variation, I mean, as you call the art house or the indie, you know, where they play especially with the form, with the formal aspects of it more, you know, I always ask, and I will ask you later, what's more important for you? I know the answer in your case, but it's songwriters. I go, Is it the formal aspect that drives you instinctively to a page, or is it the emotional aspect? And in some cases, I know it's the formal aspect that drives them to tell a story.
Yeah.
But in your case, I'm pretty sure it's the emotion, right?
Yeah, I think it's catharsis.
Yeah.
I think one of the things also is, I mean, just on the general subject of writing, I think, there's a golden rule that you should always write about people that you know about, which is why if you look at some of the great, I'm sure this applies to all the great Spanish writers, and if Lisa did Spanish literary studies, so if I was to ask her, she'd throw out some names that you would go, oh yeah, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
But on the British scene, or American scene, you've got Hemingway, who did all that traveling, including, of course, to a lot in Spain and Cuba and so forth. And he may or may not have got involved with bullfighting. I'm not sure.
Yes, he was. He was in oh my God, San Fermin and all that. He came here to drink himself to death. Just
and then you've got Graham Greene, who I think was probably involved on some level with the British Secret Service, and you've got that subtext to his various stories. So he's lived and he's explored things, and I think it's important to have traveled or to be able to draw on real life experiences. And if you can't, I think one of the criticisms of comic books is that sometimes the characters of, should we say, a new book or whatever is a knockoff of previous comic book they've seen, rather than saying, well, I don't want to be the next Howard Chaykin or the next Alan Moore or the next Neil Gaiman. I want to be the next me, and I want to go out and experience some aspect of life. And I think that's really essential. And at the same time, it's also quite cathartic. I've found, for instance, that I would be writing certain types of stories, mainly about science fiction nights, right? And about a year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago, I suddenly counted them all up, and I thought, fuck, I must have written about 10 serials about where is this coming from? And in other words, Requiem Vampire Nights, Terminators who are knights, in SpaceWarp we've got these guys who are kind of very much space knights, etc., etc. So I thought, I must have written about 10 of these. Where is this coming from? And so eventually I traced it back to its core with some, what should we say, some childhood encounters that I could have done without. And so if anything, it just makes it stronger. But you can, if you're not careful, find yourself obsessed with a subject, and you don't know where the ideas come from. So, of course, you say, oh, I must have a brilliant imagination. I fucking doubt it. It just means you've got something in the back of your head that's driving you that you haven't quite got in touch with. So I finally got in touch with these bastards that have been inspiring me. And it will be even more cathartic to write about them in the future. And I'm sure that's true for most people, whether you're writing about your dear old mum or your evil Uncle Billy or whatever. It makes sense to find out where it's coming from.
Yeah, but by the end of the day, what makes you, what makes Neil or Alan or Chaykin, etc., or Grant, is Morrison in another case, is that they write about what they know, what they like. It's every time you see a knockoff of Grant Morrison trying to talk about different aspects of the multiverse, shamanic, blah, 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 what Grant likes to write about, it feels cheap because it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like that's the way he sees the world. You know, when I was talking to Grant a month ago, we were talking about the virus, and he was telling me sometimes he thinks the virus, you know, the coronavirus, is intelligent. He wasn't talking about a conspiracy or anything freaky like that. He was telling me sometimes you try to look at it from an intellectual point of view, and you see that every time we think we solved it, it finds a way to elude us and go somewhere else. So that gives me a story. And from him, that seems natural because that's who he is. But if somebody else tells you that, it always feels like a knockoff. You know, like somebody imitating Alan or you or Neil telling these stories, because it comes from a natural,
you
know, point of view.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things to a large extent, I think I've been reasonably successful on, and Kevin has as well. I don't think anyone, I can't think of anyone who's ever attempted to rip Kevin O'Neill off, because his style is so bloody weird.
Absolutely.
It would cost, you know, it would be very, very difficult. Whereas I think we both know other artists who have been copied over the years. And I don't think that's always been the right and fair thing to do. And I think it's a little bit like that with me, that I've certainly gone out of my way to make it very difficult for other writers to, what shall we say, trade on my characters and so on. I haven't always succeeded. There have been one or two, and I'm very vocal and very mean-spirited about it, or that's what people would say. But you see, I see it like, you know, you got a house, right? And someone comes along and burgles your house or helps himself to some stuff, you know, from the attic, and think, oh, I didn't think you'd mind. Yes, I would fucking mind. You know, I mean, we talk about stories, art and scripts. We talk about them as intellectual properties. And frankly, if I had to choose, I mean, I'd really like a roof over my head, but if I had the choice of what do I need, I would rather have those intellectual properties that are in my head and put up with a famous last words, put up with a tent over my head. That, you know what I mean? If you've got a house, it's just bricks and mortar. But if you've got characters like, you know, Alan Moore with his Watchmen and so on. And so I can understand him being very sensitive about whatever the circumstances and whatever the contracts may say. I can understand him being very sensitive about people, whatever they call it, paying homage to him or tribute to him or some other bollocks, you know. Yeah. And the good news for me is that I have a strong assurance from the editor of 2000 AD that that's not going to happen on any of my 2000 AD stories. In other words, when I pop my clogs or retire, or what's happening now is I'm busy on other projects. So that's great news, because it was a particularly bad trait in British comics, more so than, well, I say more so than America, probably worse, where what I call predator writers would help themselves to other people's stories. And then, because British fans wouldn't always understand what's at stake, they might even say, well, so-and-so's done a much better job on this story than its creator. You know, a name comes to mind, Jerry Finley Day, who created lots of stories like Rogue Trooper, for example. And then someone else might come along and they say, oh, he's done a really insightful intellectual version of Rogue Trooper or whatever. Yeah, but it's Jerry's character. And of course, in Europe, as you know, if someone takes over a character and pays, you know, whoever takes over the character has to pay the original creator something. So in Asterix, I mean, I know Asterix is going on now with a new team.
Yeah.
But the original team or their estate are still being financially rewarded.
Absolutely.
And so that's absolutely right and fair. That doesn't happen in the world of British comics, because it's always been a huge problem is we sell all rights. So it means that theoretically someone else could come along tomorrow and they could take over Slaine. And people say, oh, I really love Joe Bloggs' Slaine. It's so much more refreshing than Pat's. Well, my answer to them is fuck you and fuck off, because I've spent whatever it is, umpteen decades building it up. Now, if on the other hand, Joe Bloggs has to pay me a certain sum of money for doing that, I might say, yeah, keep it going, Joe. I don't feel too bad about it, perhaps. But I mean, we all know that all these iconic characters, generally speaking, when they go to another writer, they invariably don't work. So the one that comes to mind, of course, would be Robert E. Howard with Conan. And yeah, I mean, I quite like, I'm not sure I've got the pronunciation right, Sprague de Camp, is it? The guy?
Ellis Sprague de Camp, yes. Those are...
I mean, he's heart's in the right place and so on, but he's not Robert E. Howard. And when you read Robert E. Howard stuff, you're thinking, well, it's there, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You really feel Conan.
With Howard, I always thought it's so easy to see it comes from his guts, it just flows from his guts. And with the Sprague de Camp is the intellectual way of trying to use his guts. So it's like, nope, it doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel natural.
Well, and it's the same with, I don't know.
Every writer who's done James Bond after Ian Fleming.
Yeah. And people still get, because everyone loves James Bond, but Ian Fleming's original, with all its flaws, has this certain raw energy. And apart from anything else, again, coming back to Ian Fleming was in the British Secret Service. So he was basing this on people he knew. Yeah. And so you're thinking, okay, it's horribly exaggerated, or at least I hope it's exaggerated. Galore and all the rest of it. But he knows what he's talking about, and it has that ring of truth. And again, when I think of, say, Jerry Finley Day on Rogue Trooper, the reason his future war stories were so popular with readers, editors hated them because they were so badly typed, full of all kinds of errors of logic and so on. But what Jerry had was he'd been in the army. He'd been in the territorial army. I think he'd been an officer. And so he knew what he was talking about, and it makes all the difference. So, yeah, it's so important.
Well, by the end of the day, as we said, you were talking about, people copying artists. I always tell, when I talk to young people and I see, sample pages, and I always go to watch, believe it or not, I always try to find trees. And when I see a tree, it takes me a millisecond to say, you copied this from another comic book, or you watch out the fucking window. Yeah. So when they don't look at the fucking window, it's very easy to see they don't understand reality. It's too abstracted, which is the work of an artist. They just copy from another book. So every time I get mad and say, why don't you just open the fucking window or go to the street and understand how a tree works? Because if you can't extract reality, you are not going to trick any readers. The readers know how reality works, and they know how a comic works as an abstraction. So as a writer for you, I believe we're working on the same parameters, which is we know how important the gutter, the space between panels is, and your abstraction of reality, and to count those movements so our brain completes it. So another weird question for you. How important pattern recognition is for you as a writer?
How important is
pattern recognition?
What kind? Sorry,
pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition.
Yes.
You mean?
Imagine this: we're in the caves. I'm a caveman. Nice to meet you, caveman macho. I hear bushes rustling, and I jump because I like shit. If there's that noise, it's probably because there's a tiger there. It's gonna kill me. Fucking run. So
Right,
that kind of thing, when you don't need to complete, you just suggest to the reader.
Yeah, I see what you
Because
mean.
you know that but based on the language of comics, you know that the reader is going to be able to complete it.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, I think as I get older, I think I get better at that implication. In other words, when I started in comics, in British comics, they were quite leaden.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe I should explain how it works. Is they assumed, they honestly assumed, they assumed some terrible things, which I mean, I don't think I've ranted enough about this. So they assumed that because the readers were young, 11, 12, 13, that they were stupid. And of course, you know, you're thinking, really? So they would have on the comic, right? The story might start on the front page, right? So they have on here, continued overleaf. So in other words, here, this is what you've got to turn the fucking page, you know? I mean, for God's sake. So they would assume that the reader was not very bright, which is very insulting. It's really insulting because, well, all sorts of obvious reasons why that is insulting. And then you also had, so the stories that they say, oh, the readers won't understand that. So what you're talking about in the implication, you know, suggesting something rather than drawing in the entire thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So dialogue would often be quite leaden for that reason. So and I had to unlearn that as a system. But what made it worse was that often the artists, often they were very talented artists, but sometimes they weren't particularly good storytellers. The writer and the editor was told to make up for that, which is absolutely correct, but you pay a price for it. So what it means is you have people saying, who is that man who's just come in through the door clutching a submachine gun? Because you can't see that you're not even sure what he is. It's just a shadow on the wall or something. So I picked up some really bad habits there. And then another thing that I think really harmed comics, particularly girls' comics, which are a little outside, are not so well known today. They often try to add phony morality to these things. So the heroine, instead of just thinking, God, I hate that bitch over there, I'm gonna screw her, you know, they'd have to come out with these little morality stories, like, I hate telling lies and it really makes me feel bad, but I've got no choice, you know, I have to tell a lie now. I mean, fuck off, you know. So you had all that sort of thing going on where they had so these are all terrible things that really harm a creative writer's progress. And I had to unlearn some of those damn things. And it took me quite a while to get rid of some of those horrible habits and get to the kids will really pick up the suggestion of things. I mean, we found this on SpaceWarp. What they respond to above all else is character. You know, they love character. And if you're going to have characters, the one thing they're not going to be is they're not going to have leaden dialogue. They're going to be very feisty. They're going to be full of energy and life. And you're not necessarily going to understand who they really are. You can think, oh, I need to know more about this woman or this guy. And so it's the implication, the bits that you're leaving the reader to figure out for himself. And I think that needs developing. I have a checklist, I think, of things I need to do. And so when I've written a story, even now, and I think probably it will always be the case, I go over that checklist and think, have I got that bit right? You know, So is it subtle enough, or is it funny enough, or and so on? Because you're appealing to, and particularly with SpaceWarp, something you're doubtless aware of. I don't know how far it's. I think France is more or less okay. I'm not sure about Spain, but doubtless in Britain that comics grew up, and we left our original core readers behind. They disappeared. And I believe the same thing happened in the United States. American comics, they became more and more fan orientated, and progressively they're not appealing to those 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, even though that age group, that demographic may well go and see all the latest Marvel films. They're not going out and buying all the latest Marvel comics. In other words, because the comics are somehow out of step with that audience. So what we try to do on SpaceWarp is to go back to the early 2000 AD, where we're trying to appeal to all ages, just as James Bond appeals to a 10-year-old and a 60-year-old. And I think that's how it should be. So that's a challenge. It's interesting getting, the reader feedback. And I've paid a lot of attention to kids who are, 16, 12, and 8 or 9. And their views are particularly important to me. Because apart from anything else, they don't know that I wrote Marshal Law or Charlie's War or whatever. They don't know who the fuck I am. They just picked up this comic. And in a way, that makes it more exciting, because I'm only as good as that story they're reading in SpaceWarp. They're not going, oh, this is the guy who wrote Marshal Law. Oh, this must be good. They're just going, it's all right, or it's crap, or whatever. And I think it keeps you very grounded when you're, and also, 12-year-olds generally will be surprisingly, you get real insights into things, why they like things and why they don't. There's no homage or anything. So I think it's very healthy.
No, and they have no filter, which is a good thing. I think if you've been around and you know how to take it as well as to give it, as I always say, it's a good thing that a 12-year-old comes to your face and says, that's crap.
Yeah, and they
will.
will.
They don't have a filter. They're going to tell you exactly as what they think. So when they praise you, it's even better, because they really feel it. There's no social, I'm going to make you feel good shit.
Yeah. Well, the British kids, definitely. French kids, I always found incredibly polite. It's probably the language barrier. They probably didn't know how to say in English, yeah, I fucking hate your stuff. Actually, there is one exception to that. I do remember in Portugal, I went to a convention in Portugal, and there was a guy queuing up, right? And he was way at the back of the queue, and he finally got to see me, and he said, I really love Marshal Law. And I thought, oh, that's great. Well, thanks, I'll sign your book or whatever. And then he said, but you are a bastard, he said, for the ending of, I think it was Marshal Law's Savage Dragon, where instead of the usual downbeat ending, there was an upbeat ending. He said, you are a bastard for that. And he stormed off. Now, he was about 16. So, yeah, he put me in my place.
You want to let's go with people's questions? Go, please. What are you saying?
So I say no more. Well, I'm not writing Marshal Law anymore, but if I was, no more happy endings. I don't want to be called a bastard.
Okay. But two things. I'm going to go with people's questions. And second, can you move a little to your right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Because you're being cut. Sometimes you are cut by the screen. So just move to your right a bit. Perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so let's go. Okay, Steven Bounds, hello. Luis Pevidios, hello. Luis Pevidios, elbow cuff, yes. Pedro de Mercader, hello. Philip Ebrel, Judge Dredd's Lawgiver is very similar to the Sandman's gun from the Book of Logan's Run. Yet I have never read anyone mention it. Logan's Run being an influence on Dredd. Any comments?
I think it's probably true. I think Dredd was influenced by Death Race 2000, Philip K. Dick novels.
Yeah.
But also, you're right that we would have seen Logan's Run. So, although I can't remember it, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The Widowmaker 999. With a name like that, I'm afraid to answer you, my friend. Anyway, hi, Pat. When I was a kid, I'm 30. You're still a kid, just so you know. With 30, you're a kid. I found in a basement a bunch of comics edited in Spain by a publisher called Cinco. In those pages, I discovered Flesh and Shaco. Today, I almost have all your works.
Ah, that's cool. Excellent.
Ciron Bounds, sorry, Ciron, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I'm not sure if it's Ciron or Ciron. I read the print copy of SpaceWarp and loved it, especially Jurassic Punks. Can't wait for phase 2.
Oh, that's really good to know. And yeah, I think Jurassic Punks has gone down particularly well. It's a dinosaur story set in Liverpool. And because I think we felt it was time that British cities had disasters set there, rather than it's always Los Angeles and New York or Chicago. And Liverpool is such an exciting city. So we have, in fact, I think I've got an image of it here. It's very small, but so it's a famous Liver building. There,
yeah,
and it's sort of tropical. I mean, in Liverpool, I think it rains a hell of a lot, but here, because dinosaurs have invaded, they've also brought with them viruses, and they've also brought their climate with them. So this very dark, wet. This is all the characters, by the way, in SpaceWarp. It's now a tropical city, Liverpool. So I'm glad Kieran likes that one. Excellent.
So you said the Liverpool and dinosaurs. You're not talking about the Beatles, right?
No, we deliberately because my wife went to university in Liverpool, and we both said, you know what, we've got to avoid Beatles Liverpool, at least on the first episode. I mean, I think somewhere down the line we've got to get Strawberry Fields or something in. But no, at least they said no, we don't need fucking Beatles stuff in there. You know, keep it modern, keep it cool. So thank you for that, Lisa. Kieran Bounds also says Mother Teresa and her cult of death. Yes, that's what we were talking about before. Drink and Draw Costa Rica. Hello there. As a Central American, grabbing an issue of 2000 AD was a total joy for me when it happened. I have a question. How much of Star Wars is there in Star-Lord? In Star-Lord, that's the comic that Star-Lord 2000 AD came out, and then we had a British comic called Star-Lord. And I think it was influenced by Star Wars, not in any way where you could, I don't know, really pick up on it. I mean, you had Strontium Dog, which is very different. My Robuster story certainly had elements of C-3PO and the other guy. So I suppose there were influences there, but we didn't really go in for those kind of real sort of galactic sagas. So yeah, we kept it separate. And I see there's a question on here. How much for your shirt? I can't find it online. Well, I can help you there because what we have is we have a website for SpaceWarp. And it's spacewarpcomic.com, and there's a shop there which has lots of merchandising. T-shirts and other things. So hopefully you'll find something there that works for you.
I just put on the link on the chat so people can just go there.
Cheers.
Let me see. We gotta go back because it jumped down when I wrote.
Right.
Oh, here it is. Philippe Abreu, how I have to say thank you to Pat for interviewing Tardy in London a few years ago. Great hearing about the research both of you did.
Yeah, Tardy, I'm in awe of this guy, and for readers who aren't familiar with Tardy's work, he's like he does has been doing long-running stories about World War I, the equivalent of Charlie's War. But one of the fascinating things about Tardy is he has a close friend, and so who's an expert on World War I weapons and so on. So on one occasion, Tardy told me he rang this guy up and said, I want to feature one of the early submachine guns. Do you know what they look like? And the guy said, oh, I'll bring one round for you. So he has all this material. He has so much material that they've opened a museum in Meaux, near Paris, which has all this guy's stuff. And I think all that creative inspiration there is also reflected in Tardy's work. He's so lucky to have have a museum around the corner from him. I mean,
Yeah.
My God, that's brilliant.
If you're watching this and you don't know who Jack Tardy is, you should. And if not, you're going to be expelled of this conversation because this is a genius. You should know him. Just so you know. The book I told you before, the one you gotta read, it's called The Innovators by Walter. The Innovators by Walter Isaacson.
Innovators. Walter.
I put it on the link. But I put the link there in the chat. It's an Amazon link. But it's about all the beginning of the beginning of Silicon Valley. As I said, the start of Intel, the start of Microsoft, Apple, and all the others. And calling a spade about who was a bastard, who stole from whom, who grew up and created things in a garage, etc., etc. It's a really interesting book. All biographies that Walter Isaacson writes are really interesting normally. So this one is really interesting too.
Good. Okay. Right. I'll check him out.
Okay. So Victor Herrera Q. Hi from Colombia, Mr. Mills.
Hi.
Love from Howard. Hi, Pat. What was your role in the creation of Judge Dredd? Did you give it a part of your well-known bad humor to it?
Yeah, I think what happened was that the start Dredd was probably the most messy way for a character to have ever been created. And so I'm going to give you a very summarized, almost Wikipedia version just now. What would I say about it? John Wagner came to me and he said, kids love really extreme characters. So why don't we have this cop who shoots people for dropping litter, a complete and absolute bastard. And so it started there, and then John went down one road and I went down another road, and I rewrote what John had put and suggested another version. And it must have gone through about 4 drafts. But basically, John had come up with the original idea, which was, let's have a cop who's a complete bastard. And so if it seems like, well, you wrote this version, I wrote that version, and all the rest of it, it's because we were fumbling, both of us, to find the best way for him to be a complete bastard, but also to be funny. And I think I got it sort of, and then I used a version. I had another character which called Judge Dredd, and that title kind of moved over to John's Cop. And Peter Harris came up with the ingredients for the first one. But John kicked back in round about the 6th or 7th Judge Dredd story with a really black comedy story about this granny sort of watering plants that turned into human heads. I think they were called granny blooms or something. It was really sick and really funny. And do you know what? The readers didn't like it yet, because we had to wait until John had introduced more of a saga, more of a drama element. So it's getting that fusion of drama and comedy. And I played a role in all this, and lots of us did. And it's a damn difficult character. And I mean, I can go a little off topic here, because I think John, when he wrote his really funny Judge Dredds, I think they are iconic. And I don't think where Dredd is today is where John was at in those early days. And I think, well, I'm going to say it anyway. I don't care if it's because Stallone took his helmet off, or the other one was like another movie. Underneath it all, you've got to have that humor, because that's who Dredd, that's where we started with this character. We wanted someone who was a complete bastard and who was funny at the same time. And that was very, very difficult to get right.
Yeah, because in the end, the moment Dredd stops being a satire, it doesn't work.
Yeah, you need, if it's too silly, and John knew just how to walk the line. So I think you need the drama of, I don't know, let's say the Cursed Earth, my Cursed Earth story, to drive the, but you still need that humor as well. If it's dead straight, then what have you got? You just got a guy in a black uniform who goes around killing people.
Yeah.
It's getting the balance right on that is really bloody hard. And but my favorite Judge Dredds of all time are probably ones by John. I always cite one called The Oxygen Board, where the villains, they live on the moon, and their oxygen is cut off because they haven't paid their oxygen bill. And, we've all been in situations where we haven't paid our gas bill or our electric bill, and we know they'll cut us off. And I think that, I don't know, is getting those elements right is really tough. And but anyway, there's a lot of us made Dredd what he is today. But it all started with this principle, that this idea that John had of saying, let's have a cop who's a complete and utter bastard. And that's where we started.
How much did Carlos Esquerra's designs affected the way you saw the character?
Oh, you probably know this. Famous.
I know it, but I'm not asking for me.
Yeah. Hugely. Because we sent Carlos references from Death Race 2020. If you look at the movie poster for that, you can see this guy's got a futuristic helmet, etc., etc. And Carlos came back with this amazing stuff, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, fucking hell, this is just absolute genius. My God, what is Carlos on? Because it had all sorts of elements of Spanish surrealism in the buildings, and it was so over the top. And John Wagner looked at it and said, "Oh fuck, I'm not writing this. The guy looks like a fucking Spanish pirate." and John really didn't like that interpretation, and well, I loved it. I showed it to various people just to make sure I wasn't on some kind of weird acid trip myself, and everyone loved it. And I mean, it was the most fantastic thing. I mean, the motorbike he's on is just absolutely unreal. And I think, I don't know, I mean, we're getting into deep territory here, but for what it's worth, I think, you know, Carlos is drawing on his roots, right? So he's getting his own back on all the years of being under Franco. Do you know what I mean? It's like, fuck you, Franco. At least
including the Eagles.
yeah. So all that experience of being a young man growing up in Franco's Spain, that's all coming out there. And then meanwhile, John is also drawing on his own experiences. So he's got an American background, so that comes into the stories as well. I couldn't tell you exactly where, but I know it does. But he grew up in Greenock, where I haven't checked, and I don't need to check. I think they had some pretty grim tower blocks, you know, for this city in Scotland. And that's always the way John described it to me. He'd say, "Oh no, it's pretty tough growing up in Greenock," you know, and all this kind of thing. And so I think you've got almost a little bit of a contradiction between those two versions. And I think both Carlos and John are both very strong personalities. So, you know, there's a bit of tension there between the two versions. And I think if you look at the recent movie, I think I can see the Greenock tower blocks there. And I'd much rather see Carlos's surreal skyscrapers, these flamboyant, you know, absolutely amazing, futuristic, you know, they're almost insectoid, the very early ones that Carlos did. And so I personally think that this tendency to let's make Dredd more real, I can see the thinking behind it, but I don't actually think it's right. I think you want the color, the comedy, the preposterous nature of it. You know, we're not looking for urban reality here. You know, it's like James Bond. I mean, you know, when you think of Goldfinger and all these other crazy characters, yeah, we know they're not completely real, but we don't care. Mm-hmm. And so I think, okay, it was better than Sylvester Stallone, for all the reasons that everyone seems to hate the Sylvester Stallone movie. So I feel quite nervous about saying, well, actually, it wasn't that bad. So I kind of keep quiet about my own feelings in case I get shot at dawn by fans.
Daniel Ureña says, "Hi from Costa Rica. Love your work in martial law with Kevin O'Neill. What's your opinion on Kevin's evolution as an artist? He has to be one of the best artists in the medium."
Yeah, I could rave about Kevin's art endlessly, and I'm just trying to think what I can actually. I think the big thing with Kevin's work, Kevin, he's not a frustrated writer because I don't think he has any particular desire to write full time. But on martial law, I became more and more aware of the extra touches that he would add. And anyone who, obviously, you've seen martial law, you'll see all that graffiti in the background. And that's all added by Kevin. So you've got a story going on with lettering, and you've got art, and then you've got graffiti. It's a complete soundtrack. And so I really wanted to tap into that and to bring out Kevin's creativity. So this indirectly answers your question about his progress as an artist. I would say his progress as a creative, because Kevin and we put together a comedy series called Read 'em and Weep. Mm-hmm. And the first section at least was pretty much led by Kevin. I mean, we had the most ridiculous characters, and it was really a satire on the world of comics and so on. And because Kevin doesn't have any desire to get behind a computer and write, I don't think that should stop him being recognized as a as a creative writing force. In other words, we tend to get labeled. I mean, it'd be a bit like if I suddenly said, hey, I'm going to do some drawing. People would say, oh, fuck off, you know. In other words, you're labeled as a, you know, as a writer, and that's it. And Kevin's labeled as an artist. But I really tried to bring out his writing talents. And I think I did on Read 'em and Weep. If you're interested, you can see on millsverse.com. I think it's advertised as, yeah.
Let me put on the link there for people to find. There you go. Let me go back. Okay, El Torres says, hello there. It's great to hear Maestro Mills. Benito Gallego says, absolutely loving this talk. Gotta pay you bills, guys, for saying this. Widowmaker 99, I love the crossover between Marshal Law and Pinhead. What was Clive Barker's opinion about it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, he obviously had to okay it, and I think he liked it. But when I think back on Pinhead, I remember really getting into that because Pinhead, it was originally, I think, a World War I officer who had in the trenches, and that had influenced his character. So because World War I is my is one of my passions, you know, learning and understanding it and all the rest of it. So I really got into the character of Pinhead. Yeah, almost to the extent where sometimes if I really like a character and I can't write about him anymore, I try not to look at the book because it would just make me nostalgic. So, for example, in the case of Charlie's War and Marshal Law, I just kind of flick through the pages because I know that because in one case the artist has died, and in the case of Marshal Law, Kevin has retired. And so I think the chances of him ever doing another Marshal Law are, oh man, impossible. And I think this came up on Facebook. Someone was asking about what about the
Batman Marshal Law, yeah.
I'm just going to turn my light on. You probably
yes,
know.
I was going to tell you when you finish answering this question, please turn the light on because you look like dark. Yes.
I'm just going to say I'm looking like something out of Dark Knight. Yeah. Hang on a second.
Yes.
Right. How's that? That should be better, I think. Let's see.
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So let's see. Marshal Law. Yeah. It was San Diego about approximately 6 years ago. And DC Comics went along to Kevin and they said, how would you like to do Marshal Law Batman crossover? So, of course, I think Kevin thought at first they were taking the piss, or, you know, it's like, you know, is this for real? And no, they said, we really want one. And we thought, is this really going to fly? Are we ever going to get away with this? And if you ever get Kevin on the show, you can ask him. But my recollection is that we thought, no, they're going to get cold feet somewhere down the line. But there's a tiny chance that we might get away with it. So we owe it to our readers and we owe it to ourselves. And in my case, to my deep hatred of Batman, we had to do it. So we put together a synopsis, and which was kind of safe. You know what I mean? We said, yeah. So I don't think we were crawling exactly, but we were saying like Marshal Law is, you know, has a respectful relationship with Batman. But so how we got, and we got the contract, we signed the contract. So, you know, it was a real deal. And so Kevin, and this is another example of Kevin coming in as writer, really. Kevin came down one weekend and we worked out the storyline between us. And how we got over the problem of how can we deal with Batman without it being too offensive. So we had this really horrible guy who I think was called something like the Transporter, something like that. And he was able to work through multiple universes where there would be many different Batmans. So we could say, look, it's not the authorized Batman, it's another Batman. So in this world, Bruce Wayne's dad is a complete shitbag, you know. But it's honest. It's not the real Batman. And so we had the Transporter doing horrible things to. He had some deep pathological hatred of Batman, and you know. I mean, Kevin, I think, actually likes Batman, but the funniest lines and the most cruel lines always come from Kevin on this. I think I'm almost incoherent in my dislike of the character, because he's a billionaire, as we were talking about earlier, and I'm probably just a jealous kid from a council estate. I don't know. Anyway, so. What happens is the transport. We had, I think Kevin planned to have something like 200 dead Batmen. In other words, this great pile of Batmen from different realities.
Yeah.
And a similar pile of Robins, right? In other words, so you've got pile of Batmen, pile of Robins, and then maybe 2 or 3 of Bruce Wayne's girlfriends. In other words. Which is pure Kev. That's very Kevin. That kind of comedy, and we had a scene which was a really good scene, and I've got to adapt it and use it somewhere else because it's too good to waste. Both Kevin and I went to an event. Where we saw this very wealthy guy trying to get money from all the wealthy people at the party, apart from Kevin and I, who were both quite poor and kind of felt quite outside things. Anyway, so based on that party, we had Bruce Wayne's dad saying all those suffering children in the zone. The zone is in South America, where they've all been, their country's been devastated by American superheroes. And we want to find some way to help them. So we're going to give them all a bat kite. In other words, every child in this third world country is going to have a bat kite to, this kind of thing. It's really taking the piss out of this kind of rich philanthropist guy. Yeah. And it was very closely based on this party that Kevin and I had both been to, which I won't elaborate on because I've got to use it somewhere. So there was quite a bit of there was a lot of very black comedy and a lot of cruelty, but Marshal Law and Batman, as far as I can recall, didn't fight each other that much because they were both against the Transporter. So we thought, a little naively, we thought, well, maybe that will get past DC. But of course it didn't. They changed their minds and they said, no, it's not the direction we want Batman to go these days. In other words, they're going in for this, I don't know, whatever. I don't read Batman, so I don't know. But presumably straight, no taking the piss, no dark comedy, etc. Yeah. And so that was the end. And yeah, I mean, I have got it in a synopsis, and I suppose at some point maybe I should, I don't know, maybe I should put it on my website to entertain people, perhaps.
Yeah, I can imagine somebody, big boss at DC, reading the synopsis and saying, "Who approved this?" What? Yeah, no, we did. Like, it's martial law. What are you doing? fuck off this, fuck off out of here. This is not, we are not doing it. Out. It's like in 5 seconds.
Well, this was Kevin's point of view. He was saying, look, they know what martial law is all about. What do they expect from us? Do they think we're going to do some kind of toned down thing? I mean, fans would have killed us if we'd had, martial law. Instead of that one kid in Portugal queuing up to call me a bastard, there'd be hundreds queuing up to go, you are a bastard for doing that. No, we owed it to our readers to ensure it was in the right vein. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, but that's like when when readers complain that Garth Ennis, he writes a superhero comic and he takes the piece of superheroes, makes fun of them in any most cruel possible way he can, and they are like, "Whoa, why could he do that? What a bastard! Like, why are you buying a Garth Ennis comics then?"
Yeah,
you know what he does, and then you buy it, read it, and complain because Garth is being Garth and writing the way Garth does.
Yeah. I mean, you know what to expect if it's Garth or whoever. Yeah, you know what you're going to get. Absolutely. Yeah.
By the way, when I had Garth here, we talked about martial law. What a big influence he was on him, and he had very nice words to say about you. Yeah, so you know.
Nice. Yeah. And as we're on that subject, because it's bound to come up, I've never really looked at The Boys. I know it takes the piss out of superheroes, and I know that some readers see what shall we say, see a similarity, and for a very, very, I don't have a point of view on it, but for a very long time, people would write to me and they'd raise this point, and I think both Kevin and I decided that because Garth is also taking the piss out of superheroes, we shouldn't really look at that in any detail. Just as, for example, I think there's another one, isn't there? His name has slipped my mind. But just to make sure that we don't hit the same note. But I did cover this subject recently, or rather, I published a couple of readers' comments, and I've stayed neutral in the debate because, as I say, I think because The Boys has gone to a second series on Amazon, and well, I think maybe from our point of view, it's probably a good thing, because if it's a success, I'm sure someone else out there an appetite for say, well, have some more. We regularly get film interest in martial law, but often it's what you might call art house interest. In other words, someone wants to make a kind of punk movie about it, and then you say, well, we want you to be involved, which means you want us to write the script, and both Kevin and I have had quite rough experiences in the world of movies, so we're holding out for the right deal, which will come along. Hopefully it will.
Yeah, and also, gotta say, I've read The Boys and I've read Marshal Law and I've read, most of your work and most of God's work. The only thing in common could be that, the dislike and taking the piece of superheroes. Your points of view are completely different. Garth is, let me say, Garth is kinder with superheroes than you are, much kinder.
Well, that actually,
and he tends to go more in an ironic way. You're very different. One would say you are more sardonic when he's more ironic, or the other way around. If the subject can be common, yeah. But in his case, as he always says, and he told me the last time, it's not that I hate them that much. It's that I didn't grow up with them. I grew up reading war stories and other things. So my influences were others. So when I read about superheroes, I don't have them internalized or that I like them at all. It's not something that I grew up with.
Now, it's funny you should mention that, because it takes us back to something I was talking about earlier with these nights. Because sometimes I would think to myself, where the fuck does my hatred of superheroes come from? Because as you rightly point out, it's pathological. I mean, I really hate them, and it's not like I mean, I've had opportunities to write them, and in fact, I have written one or two, but I've sometimes thought to myself, where the hell does this come from? And the explanation, which is too big to get into, the explanation is I encountered as a kid a lot of people as a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 over quite a long period of time. I'm trying to think yeah, you do actually have them in Spain. Kind of Catholic knights, right? So they're not Freemasons, but they're a bit like that, right? And I came across a lot of them, and they're all what would you call them? Well, they're relatively rich, you know, powerful and so on. And so that's where my hatred of superheroes comes from. It's not, I probably don't actually really care about Superman or Batman that much. It actually comes from this childhood experience. So just as Garth, thankfully he didn't have that kind of negative experience I had, which I obviously have turned into making money, so it wasn't that bad. But you can see it even in the title, The Boys. I mean, that's straight from Northern Ireland, you know.
Yes,
The Boys,
yeah.
Something in Northern Ireland. So it has a lot of meaning for him, that title.
Yes, absolutely. That title has a much deeper meaning that people realize.
Yeah. There's in Northern Ireland, it can mean many different things to many different people. Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very sensitive title in that respect. So for me, I'm actually having a go at these various wealthy people, because that's the thing with superheroes, is they're all rich, and that's one of the things I hate about them. If they were blue collar workers like Marshal Law, I'd be thinking, hey, they're good characters, you know, they're good guys. And occasionally you get characters like that do turn up amongst superheroes.
Yeah, you have a Spider-Man, of course.
Yeah, and I see Spider-Man, I don't have that same feeling about, because he's not a billionaire. Certainly when Stan Lee was writing him, he was a very ordinary kid. Yeah. And in many respects, he would be the equivalent of it's a girls' comic story featuring a guy, and so yeah. I really understand that whole you know, the fact he puts his costume in the washing machine and it comes out wrong and all that kind of stuff. That's classic girls' comics. I used to love writing this kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think my pathological dislike of the superheroes actually isn't to do with them as characters, because I never grew up reading them either. The only American comic I can remember reading as a kid, which I quite liked, was a character from, I think, Harvey Comics called Sad Sack. It's just a miserable version of Sergeant Bilko. And I quite liked him, but I wouldn't go out and buy the next the next copy. But there were always copies of these comics around. So yeah, superheroes. Actually, I can remember I was working at DC Thompson's. I think I was 20 years old or 21, and John Wagner and I had decided that we were going to go freelance and we were going to write comics, and we're going to make a lot of money. We got the first bit right anyway. And he said, I think it was something like this. He said, you know, you don't know anything about superheroes. You need to read superhero comics. Because I said, well, I never read them as a kid. He said, well, you need to get some. So I thought, okay, John. No. So I went out and bought, I don't know, something like a Green Lantern Summer Special Annual or something, or whatever it was called. And I remember reading this thing and thinking, oh, fuck, have I got to write this kind of stuff, you know? He said, oh, no, we need to. And of course, John is as bad as I am. I mean, I've written maybe 1 or 2 superhero stories over the years, and he's written some Batman stories, I think, way back with Alan Grant.
Yeah, him and Alan, yeah.
Yeah, but by and large, he's you know, he hasn't covered superheroes either. I think we've both got a love of very British comics, of which Judge Dredd is a classic example. There is something, we are weird, and I think this has been summed up. I covered it in my book. I think a Serbian film director says something. I think it was something like, yeah, your British comics, they're and Judge Dredd in particular, it's not American. It lacks, I think he said something like, it lacks the polish and the subtlety of European comics, which is absolutely true. So we're out there. We're fucking weird. We're out there on our own, really. You know.
El Torres says science fiction and fantasy is a powerful tool to talk about ideologies and politics, but many US and European readers seems to be against that. Is it the same in the UK?
Yeah, I'm just absorbing the fact that Europeans aren't so keen on subtext, or that's the viewpoint expressed.
I don't agree with him, but you know.
I'm just chuckling, by the way. I've just seen a question here from someone called Craigson Scan, and he said, "Did you get the idea for Marshal Law from the boys?" He's winding me up. I know. Craigson, I think if you look at the dates, you'll see Marshal Law.
Yes. That's like when people, which I found really offensive, and I was there once and I had to jump in. People asking Neil if he got the influence for the books of magic from Harry Potter.
Oh, ouch, yeah.
And that was, you know, the books of magic and Teen Hunter, what J.K. Rowling swiped for, was 10 fucking years earlier.
Right. Okay. Well, in the case of Craigson, I think he's
nah, yeah. he's just busting your balls.
Yeah. We did get it from the boys.
Yes. But you know why? Because Pat and Kevin, believe it or not, they can travel in time.
Exactly.
They have superpowers. Anyway, back to the question.
Yeah. Again, about the do people? Yeah. During the 1990s, I got a real hard time of having stories that were seen as being polemic. Now, this was partly the editor, because the editor, I don't know what the editor at that time, there was a reaction against what you might call political stories, against subtext and so on. And it was I think it was because everyone started to become very insecure. They could see that comics, which up till then had been selling well, suddenly they started to go down, and no one knew why. And they couldn't really absorb the original thing, which is that they started to go down because they'd lost touch with their readers. In other words, early 2000 AD has black comedy like we've been discussing. But there was also a place for political comics. Now, that's reality, but it was making people feel uncomfortable. So we did a comic called Crisis, which I stress I was not the editor of. I was just simply a writer on. And so they said, do you want to write about third world issues? And so it's third world issues in South America, or perhaps Central America, and the politics of food. Now, you couldn't talk about that today because on one level, people don't care. You know, it's disappeared. So, but back at the end of the 80s and the early 90s, people were really concerned with the politics of food. It was an issue, just like if today someone brought out a comic about COVID, I think a lot of people would be really interested in it, especially if it was saying something new and challenging and so on. So it was of its time, but it bothered a lot of people because they thought, oh God, why are comics taking this road? And so I found with Charlie's War, which I'd written in the 1980s, I'd always managed to kind of keep the subtext down, and then eventually I started to become a little more polemic and a little more polemic and probably ranting at the end of it all. But I was always able to keep it within certain bounds because the central character was a kind of patriot. And in that sense, I don't identify with him, or at least I don't identify with Charlie Bourne's version of patriotism, because I really despise the establishment on so many levels. But it was like, you can go as far as Charlie's War, but don't go much further. And I think, so we did Third World War, and of course this was Carlos Esquerra, and Carlos did some fantastic artwork because, of course, with his Spanish background, he gave a real sense of lushness and power and energy to the whole South American issues. And you know, looking at it now, it's pretty obvious from feedback we have that it worked. A lot of people liked it. As a comic, Crisis succeeded commercially, even though it was a hybrid comic, and it was totally wrong, because what you had was you had a story called New Statesman, which had, what should we say, it was in the Watchmen genre, right? And so you have a story like Watchmen with a story about the politics of food. They don't go together. You know what I mean? You wouldn't put, I don't think you'd really put Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore back to back in that way, because they've got their own identity and they're going in different paths. So I think the basic idea was problematic, and you had to have a winner and a loser. In other words, the readers almost had to choose, and what they chose Third World War. They weren't so keen on New Statesman, although obviously there will be some readers out there who say, "Oh, I loved it." I'm sure you did, but it wasn't Watchmen, if you like. And Third World War was unique, and it was, and there were things I was doing in Third World War that I think actually are worth lingering on for a moment. I did something that I has never been, to my knowledge, ever been done in comics before. All the main characters, with one exception, were all based on real people, all people I knew. So I would write a rough synopsis of what I was going to have happen each week. And then I would go to the characters and I say, I'm going to have, this character is going to say or do this. Is that what you would do? And you know what? They would invariably surprise me. They say, no, I wouldn't say that at all. And so I was actually channeling that original energy. And that's why a lot of the characters in Third World War are really strong. And there's one exception, because I couldn't find anyone like her. I had a born-again fundamentalist Christian. And I don't have any friends who are born again.
No, I don't see you. No.
I'm fucked up there. So, as one or two readers have pointed out, they said, "Well, you know, I liked all your characters, but I didn't really believe in the born again Christian." I thought, "Fuck," you know, because I'm not prepared to go out there and make friends with a born again Christian. There are some things I will not do, even because. Yes. And that was one of them. So what was the net upshot was, a lot of people liked it, and it now they look back on it and it's really well regarded. But I think it also scared people, because not so much because of the politics that's being said. It was more like, oh God, is this where comics are going? So they're moving away from their roots. And in that sense, I understand their fear, because what a lot of people want, you know, it's like if you start off with James Bond and then suddenly you start to get into, shall we say, John le Carré. Well, that's okay. But then you start to get into, what are the British Secret Service really up to? Which I would desperately love to do, right? And people might say, no, that's too much. So you're kind of governed by where your audience is at. In other words, you can go one step ahead of them, maybe even 2 steps, but 3 steps, and they'll go, wait a minute, Pat, you're going too far there. So you're kind of reined in by them. And of course, I'm fine with that. I don't swear or go, bastards, what's the matter with them? No, I just say, okay, well, that's the way the cards fall, and that's how it's got to be.
So absolutely. Philip Everett says Brutus is a Trojan prince, and every European country claims descent from Priam's royal family. Homer makes all the Trojans noble, and the Greeks are shown in a very bad light. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I mean, Brutus is a European character, but he definitely ends up, after all these travels, everyone always ends up in Britain. I mean, Brutus isn't the only one. There's Pharaoh Akhenaten's daughter, called Scota. Scotland is named after her. There's all these mythical voyages where people travel across Europe and end up in Britain. It's the complete opposite of Brexit, isn't it? You know, Britain's trying to get away from Europe.
By the way, Philip, I don't think that Spain's royal family has any, claims any descent from Priam's royal family. So I don't think it's every European country, but who knows?
Yeah.
Pedro Mercader, if you had to recreate martial law now, with this weird political situation and the superhero movies dominating culture, how would your approach change, if at all?
That's a good point. I think we would find. I think you start by finding people who are claiming to be heroes, right? So what we've got to do, if I was, say, Kevin and I were doing martial law tomorrow, we'd say, who's claiming to be a hero? And then we'd turn them into a superhero, right? I'll give you an example of that, and I shouldn't do really, because they're well, what does it matter? It won't come out the same if someone else does it. But for a while, we seriously considered, okay, we did a novel. Kevin and I did a novel together. It's a text novel, which is long out of print because people want comics. They won't read the fucking text version, which is annoying because there's great stuff in there, seriously. So we did one on a famous scandal in Britain, which you may know of. The Christine Keeler scandal. It nearly brought down the British government in the 1960s. So we turned everyone into a superhero or a superheroine. And Christine Keeler, bless her, was really exploited. She wasn't a very bright character, and she was quite a tragic character. So making her into a dumb superheroine was really suited the story. And similarly, this was the height of the Christine Keeler scandal was at the height of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. So we had Russian superheroes and Russian superheroines, including one called, I think, Black Madonna. Because the religious icon, the Orthodox icon, I think they're called Black Madonnas. And so we had a lot of fun with that. But what I'm driving at is that we picked a political scenario and turned everyone into superheroes. And another one we considered, and of course I think it's now been mined to death, so I don't think no one cares anymore. But we did seriously consider doing the same thing on the Marilyn Monroe, her world, you know, because first of all, she'd make a great superheroine, number one, right? And then you've got Robert Kennedy and Jack Kennedy, both of whom were involved with her. So you've got these two public spirit-like characters, right, who are really powerful. So you could imagine them flying in, and as you doubtless know, there were some very sordid details on Marilyn Monroe's alleged suicide. Now, you imagine what...
Suicide my ass.
Oh, well done, well done, well done.
I don't believe a word of that. People was going to find out she was fucking the president, and they just killed her.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you imagine with that whole thing, and in case you didn't pick up on David's very witty line there, I think enemas played a role in her demise.
There you go.
You imagine, and we never actually discussed it, but I know Kevin would come up with something that I think, fuck, why did I miss that? See, he would have done something with a superheroine of the Marilyn Monroe ilk being killed in some way with some kind of enema. And now how he would do it, I have no idea. But it would be very dark and very funny. And it, you know, well, anyway, we thought about doing that whole scandal, and it would have worked. But the problem also is that Kevin would only produce maybe 1 or 2 stories a year. I mean, he's not a fast artist, and you know, his work is very painstaking and so forth. So to bring it back to 2020, if we would apply the same logic today. So the one that comes to mind is Trump. But I mean, that might almost be too dated in a way, because, you know, in a year's time, maybe no one cares about him. But if we brought it out in time, you think of the fun that Kevin would have with a superhero inspired by Donald Trump and his wife, you know what I mean? And that business of their hands barely touching one another. And obviously I would put a lot into that as well myself. And you know, he's dodgy family. And
yes. So,
you know, if you're wondering where Marshal Law would go today, that's how we would approach a story. And of course, the first challenge is I would have to, if you like, I would possibly come up with something like that, like say, Kev, why don't we do the Trumps? But his natural reaction would probably be, oh, that's fucking horrible. Why do I don't want to draw these people. So I'd almost have to find something where he go, oh yeah, that might work. So you've almost got to attract, you know, with creator-owned books like this, you've got to find some way of luring the artist in and saying, well, that could work. To be fair, I think Kevin, as you'll know from Torquemada and Nemesis, he has a fairly negative view of the Catholic Church, like myself. So if there are any characters out there who had a kind of Catholic origins, that would probably persuade him. I think I could get him in. So that's what you're seeing here is the kind of thought process that goes on in my head when I'm trying to persuade an artist to draw something, you know, fairly offensive and darkly funny.
Love Frank Howard asks you, with Marshal Law, did you want to get to another level of violence and criticism, bigger or higher than the one you guys had in Judge Dredd or comics of that time, like The Punisher of Watchmen? And also, how much did Kevin had to do with the creation of the character?
Well, it's very much a 50-50 relationship on Marshal Law. I think the best way to describe it is, I think we really, I mean, that's worth lingering on for a moment, really, because, it really was like Gilbert and Sullivan or Rodgers and Hammerstein or Lennon and McCartney. We kind of egg each other on. Do you know what I mean? So he would suggest something. I would say, yeah, why don't we do that? And then it would just spiral out of control. Mm-hmm. And so that's how it would kind of work. And yeah, sorry, what was the original question? I just
No. The original question is just if you when you created Marshal Law,
violence,
you wanted to reach a higher level of violence and criticism than with Judge Dredd or with like books of that era like Watchmen or Punisher.
I think the books were certainly shocking people at that time. I think by comparison, things have calmed down quite a lot today. So I think that I think a lot of the violence didn't come from the fact that it was the thing to do at the time, or even let's make this more extreme than the Punisher or Judge Dredd. I think a lot of it came from the fact that I really hated superheroes. And yeah, it comes back to what Garth was saying, that he doesn't, he's kind of fairly indifferent to them, you know what I mean, which is far healthier. But no, I used to really get out of my pram, and I think it is actually not so much because Batman's a billionaire and so what. I think it's more because I came across so many people as a kid where I was witnessing a class war. I think that's the only way I can put it. So I was, what should we say? I was a factor in a class war where I had, if you like, one foot in one camp and one foot in another camp, and I could really see how the class war worked. And I imagine as a kid, because obviously you move on in time, unless you want to be locked up in an asylum, you say, get over it, Pat, move on. But it's still there in the back of your head. And so I think with superheroes, I really got an opportunity to bring out that childhood hatred. So I think Kevin picked up on that. And he has a pretty negative view of society generally. You know what I mean? In other words, and I think he almost was topping me. You know what I mean? So that I mean, look at the way the character looks, for example. Now, with the barbed wire and everything. Now, in recent years, you might say, well, perhaps that's inspired by BDSM or Skin 2 magazine and things. But I think when Kevin came up with this, I think it was years before Tarantino and all this kind of stuff. And I've never asked him, and I don't think any comic journalist or interviewer or fan even has asked him, where did you get the idea for the costume from? And maybe I should have asked him. I just remember looking at it and thinking, wow, this guy looks amazing. And maybe I should have asked him. But so I think it came from somewhere within. It was a kind of an alter ego. So Kevin's dislike of all kinds of people in society probably all came through. And then it kind of meets my dislike of certain people in society, and the combination of the two, you just end up with something really toxic. Yeah.
Pedro de Mercader adds to that question saying, why do you think your reads have that acid and harsh point of view?
Why? I think
because they live in an island. No, I'm kidding.
I think Brits are pretty extreme in our style. I mean, it comes back to this comment I was talking about earlier, how Europeans have this this wonderful delicate artwork, like Mobius, for example, or Bilal, and you can really admire the gentleness of the science fiction future. But I think in Britain we have a kind of punk sensibility, and of course that's where it injected all kinds of new energy and new life into American comics. Everyone's different. So Neil Gaiman, Garth Ennis, Grant Morrison, they all, and Alan, of course, all going into the States and breathing new life into these characters.
I remember when I have Peter Milligan here, and somebody asked about the British invasion, and we both said, no British invasion. Everybody was completely different from each other. Peter was writing completely different than Jamie Delano, who was writing completely different things than Alan, who was writing completely different things from Grant and from Neil. It was completely different point of views that made comics richer. But talking about an invasion, like you were all the same kind of writer, just diminishes your talent as writers.
It's a very good point. And the other thing as well is, I think, even if 2000 AD hadn't existed, some of those guys would have made it in America. It might have been longer, it may have been harder, but they would have gone there. And which is why I tend to bristle this kind of it was 2000 like 2000 AD leading to the so-called British invasion. Like, that's a good thing. No, it's a fucking bad thing, because we lost all these guys because we couldn't pay them the right money, and they quite rightly wanted to eat. So Kevin O'Neill was a case in point. He stopped working for 2000 AD because he was, he was getting shit money. So there was no choice. So yeah, I'm sure people like Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and so on, they would have found their way to America. But it's also worth remembering, which always gets, at this point, always gets neglected because it doesn't fit the cliches, the stereotype. After I'd done 2000 AD, I got together with all the kind of classic 2000 AD artists at that time: Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, Mike McMahon, Kevin O'Neill, and Ian Gibson. Mm-hmm. And all of us wanted to do something outside 2000 AD because, all that talent was not being financially rewarded. Now, even Brian and Dave, all of us, where we wanted to work was for Europe, not the States. This idea that somehow Marvel and DC is the peak of career is crap. It's not true. Who we wanted to work for was Dargo in France. And what happened was, we got together with Nick Landau, the publisher of Titan Books and things, and he did a project, a robot history of the future, and he took it around Frankfurt Book Fair and various other things, and the French were really interested in it. Dargo was interested. He's dead now, but it was Claude Moliterni, who I think was a well-known editor and writer, and he said, yeah, we want to do this, and I think that was our first experience, and first of many, of being endlessly pissed around by publishers, which has got nothing to do with whether you're French, American, British. It's life. That's what's going to happen. And they'll say, yeah, we love it. Yeah, we're going to do it. We'll get back to you. Yeah. So we got pissed around by the French for, I don't know, let's say 6 months or something. And at that point, I think Dave Gibbons and then Brian moved out towards the States. But this idea that we all want to work for the United States, I mean, that's very questionable. And I don't personally like it, because it reminds me of Tony Blair's arse licking of George Bush. It's like, why would working for the States be the thing to do? And that's perhaps more obvious now, as sales of comics in America are not what they once were. So it's no longer. And and also, we'd all of us grown up on Warren comics, which I have huge respect for. And 2000 AD was influenced by French comics and also by Warren comics, which arguably are much closer to Europe. You know, Mike Kaluta, Bernie Wrightson, and so on. We were very, very influenced by those. And when they kind of got crushed into the superhero corset, I think they lost something, some of those guys, you know, when they would be, you know, because, I mean, I love the size of European comics. I mean, this is small compared to, say, French bande dessinée, which would be a bit bigger than this. But why do we want to be in these kind of small comics where the artwork gets, we don't have that sense of background and so on? And so we were very, I mean, I was looking at French comics all the time when I started 2000 AD, and Spanish comics, of course, and Italian ones. Yeah, some great Italian artists that and stories that I was influenced by. And so that's all, and that's been lost. So that what we end, you know, it needs a little bit of that European influence, I think, for our stuff. Otherwise, it's probably too crude and too down market. I mean, so if you take, for example, I think both Kevin and I were influenced by Philippe Drouillet on, you know, Lone Sloane Delirious. I think was an inspiration for Nemesis. You know, the Priest of the Red Redemption in Lone Sloane Delirious. And I remember saying, I met Philippe about 4 or 5 years ago at Angoulême, and I said, "Oh, you were a great influence." And he said, "Oh, thank you. You'll be hearing from my lawyers." He meant it as a joke. He's a really nice guy. But yeah, so there's that whole European dimension that we've kind of lost track of a little bit. Yeah, so that one's watching, I think.
Torres says it's great to finally hear creators talk about the importance of lettering. Drink and Draw Costa Rica asks you, Elon Musk, do you have any word on him? And have you used him as one of your characters?
Who's Donald?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. No, he's on my list. He's on my list because he's come out with some great one-liners. There was that one about the coup in Bolivia. I don't know if you remember that, where there's some mineral which I think is used in computers that there's a big supply of in Bolivia, and he said something like,
he needed it for the batteries, for the Tesla car batteries. Yes.
Oh, was that it? Yeah. Okay. Right. And he said, you know, if we want to have a coup there, we'll coup whoever we want, something like that. And I thought, that's a line. So yeah, he's on my list. Elon Musk.
Yeah, he's the same guy who says that the 8-hour, you know, work shift should be avoided. He says, I work 20 hours, so everybody should do the same thing.
Yeah,
he has a lot of what?
We should all get his money as well. Yeah.
And his Turkish, you know, he was losing his hair and he went to Turkey and get new ones. So
did it work?
Well, he got it implanted. He got it implanted. So he's a villain. He's a movie villain in all sense of the word. You know, I'm going to save the world, but then he says things like that, and you're like, maybe he's not Tony Stark in the end, you know, because some people say, oh, he's the real life Tony Stark. Like, I don't think he is. He plays one really well, but he's the villain that he's sitting down, you know, in the back in the Bond movies.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, he's definitely someone. Yeah, because I mean, there's all that other. I'm just occurring to me. Yeah, he's probably the next villain in the SpaceWarp comic, because he's got that kind of spaceship he's got, and
SpaceX.
I mean, that's
and they made the first test of the Hyperloop, which is his, you know, vacuum riding train that can be at like 1,000 kilometers per hour or something like that. So he has the Hyperloop, he has the Tesla, which is the cars, has a SpaceX, If you turn around and shoot, he even has a company that is called the Boring Company
Oh, okay.
that makes flamethrowers.
Oh my God.
So you dig a bit, you're gonna find he's the perfect villain for your story. Believe me.
The other thing, of course, is I mean, James Bond has been delayed because of COVID, but I would have thought that he would be on their shortlist for their next James Bond villain themselves.
Absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
these guys up, and
and he also has those. Have you heard about the small satellites he's sending up as a constellation to have internet connection in poor countries and all that?
No, I didn't know about that. Yeah, that too has.
Imagine that I'm launching. The astronomers, the astrophysicists are really mad because that shit is covering the sky so much. It's really bad for sky observations, so for watching space.
See, all right, okay.
Because they reflect on sunlight.
Right.
So
yeah.
and he's launching like 100, 200 every week, with the SpaceX.
Yeah.
So discovering the sky, you can see the constellation passing. If you go to the website I forgot the name of the constellation, but if you just type Elon Musk internet satellites, you will find about it. So imagine a story about all the small satellites he has on the sky to control internet communications. He's the fucking villain of a fucking movie, if you put it all together.
Well, you can. Real life villains always amaze me. Now, there's one I used in Sláine, and this will come as no surprise to you. Of course, it's the Catholic Church. I mean, why wouldn't it be? And this is a quote. I haven't got my glasses on, but I think I can read this. This is by a Jesuit. The Vatican have an observatory in Arizona where they're looking for alien life, and it's run by Jesuits. And thank God Kevin's not drawing this story, because you can imagine what it would look like. This is what this Jesuit priest said, and this was only, say, 10 years ago, I think. He said, if civilizations were to be found on other planets, and if it were feasible to communicate with them, then we would want to go there and convert them to the word of Jesus Christ, etc., etc. In other words, want to baptize them and so forth. And I thought, I cannot believe I'm reading this, right? And it gets worse, because so the Vatican is funding, it's the largest radio telescope, I think, in the world, right? And it's called, believe it or not, Lucifer. The initials. I mean, this is like something out of a Joker comic book or something. So it's called Lucifer, and they're looking for this stuff. And as I say, they're all Jesuits. And it gets worse still, because the mountain that they're on is a holy mountain of the Apache Indians. And they want to go on this mountain because that's where they've been praying for the last several thousand years, let's say, or several hundred years. And the Jesuits say, no, you can't come on our mountain because we own it now, right? So this is, if they're going to treat Apache Indians like this, you imagine how they're going to treat aliens if there's some poor buggers out there who if this could ever happen. And they're saying, because you don't have any written records, you don't have a holy book. And the Apaches are saying, well, it's our tradition. We don't need to write it down. It's our tradition. It's saying, no, that's not possible. You need to bring us proof. You need to bring us proof that you have a religion, and that you don't just want to climb this mountain just for the hell of it. And you know what? These Apache Indians, they have to have a prayer permit signed by the Vatican Observatory, so that they can go and pray on their holy mountain. And I'm thinking, I mean, this is like Elon Musk again. I mean, so obviously I feature that in the story, because villains are always far worse than anything, real life villains, than anything that people make up in fiction. And yeah, it always astonishes me. And when you highlight some of their crimes, we have a problem. It's probably the same in Spain, and it's probably the same everywhere else now. If you highlight their crimes in a non-fiction way, people won't take any notice of you. They'll say, oh, that's conspiracy theory. But you're saying, no, it's true. They really are like this. Oh, yeah, it's fake news. It's conspiracy theory or something like that. And it's a problem to get past that a lot of truth can't come out in a way that it should, because they say, oh, it's conspiracy theory. So in a way, that's one of the values of comic books. It's not the same as being able to expose it in nonfiction, but at least if you can feature it in a comic book, you can get the truth out. And you certainly won't be able to get it out in amongst British publishers. That you find lots of names of different publishers, but there's probably only about 5. Of one or two of whom you'll know from Spain. Hachette, for example, they own several publishing houses, I think, and so forth. So all the creativity is funneled through about 5 big publishers.
Yes,
are the equivalent of Amazon and Elon Musk. In other words, they're not going to take kindly to the kind of abusive stuff that I write, you know. So in a way, that's a lot of this. It comes back to what we were saying earlier. It's one of the strengths of comics is we can still talk at street level, like rock music can and still does, because all the others have been shut down. It's all lift music. It's all Muzak, you know.
Yeah. So
comics are, I think, are more important than ever in some respects, but it's surprising. In my sad experience in Britain, discounting all those guys you talked about, the so-called British invasion, because they're all ballsy, tough bastards, you know, really, you know, kicking ass. But a lot of the people who remain, shall we say, are very middle of the road and very conservative. So I feel I have absolutely fuck all in common with them, because when I was starting in comics, everyone around me was writing and drawing really edgy stuff, you know, particularly from Scotland. Scotland, they have a very sharp sense of humor, shall we say, Glasgow in particular. That probably comes through when you're talking to Grant Morrison and so forth. And so it was like growing up in a punk environment several years before punk really took off. And I don't want to, the idea of it all being, I don't know, conservative and middle of the road, or the phrase we use in the UK is centrist. Yeah. You know, I'm not even left wing. I'm off the spectrum.
Okay. Kieran Bounds asks if you're going to do a SpaceWarp face masks.
I'm going to ask Lisa that. She's just brought up a beer. Are we going to do?
Face mask? Yes, we could do, couldn't we?
And would they be the ones of Doc Sot?
Doc Sot, maybe, or just the spiral, or
that kind of that's the guy.
But in colour, maybe. Yeah,
in colour. In other words, the guy's got to look pretty horrible. Yeah. So yeah, we would do something along those lines. Yeah.
Okay. Rafa Garres says, "Good afternoon, Pat." Tito James. Oh, by the way, we've been at this for 2 hours and 34 minutes, so maybe we should just go with, fast answers, because I have a family to go back to, and you have and Lisa's waiting for you probably too. So let's just try to go faster, okay? Tito James, do you feel that comics have become more or less transgressive?
What does transgressive mean? Is that to do with transgender?
No, I think he means controversial.
Oh, good. Because I don't know. I think they've become much safer now, and I miss the ballsiness of the comics of yesteryear. Okay.
Flaggerify, well, I guess. Damn, missed the start. Hi, Pat and David. Hello, Flagger.
Hi.
Drink and Draw Costa Rica says, we need a SpaceWarp here in Costa Rica. How much for your t-shirt? I can find it online. As we said before, that's the link. Go for it. Sergio Aguirre, I really love that your main characters have some working class pride and the anti-establishment and anti-bellicism tone of your stories.
Good. That's great. Okay.
Flagify says, will your Dan Dare from New Eagle ever be reprinted?
That's a tough one because the guy who owns the rights to Dan Dare wants a lot of money to for them to be reprinted, and so yeah, he's not budging. That's the last I heard. It's a shame because the artwork is by Ian Kennedy, and he's a brilliant painter. So yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hope it changes. Michael Lightfoot. Hi, Pat. Could you take us to your writing process for, say, a classic British style 5-page episode or something? Many thanks for 2000 AD. It totally blew my mind when I was 10 years old.
That's a big question. I will try to keep this brief. I think about something that I feel really passionate about and that I think the readers will respond to. And then I build a story around it. Obviously, I think up the characters separately because I think, what kind of characters are the readers going to respond to? So in the case of in SpaceWarp, I had a guy, Hellbreaker, who's very elegant. So he wears an even. Oh, well, there he is on the back cover. He's sort of like James Bond, and we hadn't done a character like that in British comics, not that I can recall. And so you have this character, and then you think, what do you want him to do? And then I think of something that I can relate to or have experienced and bring that into the story. Yep.
Sergio Aguirre, why did you take Marshal Law out of the Epic imprint?
Yeah, I think we were slightly nuts when we did that. We thought that we would make more money by producing it for Toxic, which was, I think, Neptune publishers. And in the long run, that was not, we didn't make the kind of money that we were expecting. In one respect, we probably should have stayed with Marvel Epic. But the problem was that Kevin takes a lot of time and care over his work. And even working for Marvel Epic, he wasn't making enough money. And so we thought moving to Britain, moving to do it for Toxic, we would make more money. And that didn't work out. And then we went to Dark Horse, and we didn't make money there either. So now we've gone to DC Comics. And in case anyone's wondering, I don't think we can ever leave there, because once you work for DC, I think we signed a contract, and as long as they keep on publishing it, I don't think we can ever leave them.
Wow.
I'm not sure, but I don't think so. Yeah, I'll have another look at the contract.
Yes, please do. Gregson's son says Accident Man is a punk link. When is the new Accident Man comic going to be released?
New Accident Man. There's no new Accident Man comic planned. There was a first Accident Man movie on a very low budget, which did a great, I mean, for a £1 million budget was pretty good. You know, I mean, okay, not everyone liked it, but it followed the comic closely. And and I know the actor who owns the rights to Accident Man movies wants to do a second one.
Yes, he was asking also if there's going to be a second movie.
Yeah, it's listed on IMDb, but whether it, you know what these things are like, it can take ages. I like to think it will happen. but it does need a kind of boot up the arse to really make it happen.
Philip Ever says, I agree with Pat about the Sylvester Stallone Dredd. I don't think it's as bad as people could try to make it out.
Great.
It says Flaggerfly says, I agree with Philip Ebrel. The world and design in the Stallone movie were more faithful to the comic than the new one was, aside, of course, of Dredd's helmet.
Yeah, and I went around the movie set of the first Dredd movie, and it was wonderful to walk around Mega City. Was such a thrill, and you know, it was brilliant. And okay, the story wasn't right, and there was a lot that wasn't right, but my God, they really got the look of the thing right. Apart from the Versace Dredd look, which it just stick to Carlos got it right. I mean, why does anyone want to modify it? And that applies to the second movie as well.
Yes.
Carlos got it right first time. Don't fuck with the genius, you know?
Yeah. Don't fix something that is not broken. That's it.
Yeah.
La Berenjena Atómica, hello, Mr. Mills and David. Could it be possible to talk about how Charlie's work came to be, please?
Well, I've always been interested in World War One, and I saw an anti-war film called Oh, What a Lovely War, which is a bit dated now, but is still quite powerful. And everybody said it's impossible to do a story about World War One because it's so boring. People are just sitting around in a trench and being, you know, there's no opportunities for heroism and spectacular action. And they're absolutely correct. So what I had to do, I had to write better to make it work. In other words, you can't write World War One stories like Charlie's War unless you put a lot of yourself into the quality of the writing. So I had to up my game to make it work, because in World War II, you can have big tanks and planes and lots of stuff going on, and that disguises the quality of your writing. And a lot of writers hide behind that sort of thing. So I had to make really good characters and really emotional scenes. And I was blessed with a brilliant artist like Joe Cahoon. And so that was it.
Yeah. Same question about the Slaine, and how was it to work with Simon Beasley? Thank you for your time.
Yeah, creating Slaine was tough as well, because my ex-wife Angela is a very good fantasy artist, and we thought, well, we should really do something together. And the more we put it together, the more we realized, to our horror, that it had to be really good. Otherwise, everyone was going to go, oh, nepotism. You know what I mean? So we kind of walked into a bit of a trap there, where it actually had to be really bloody good. And I would have been very defensive of her if you know, if where she wasn't getting much support from editorial, which really pissed me off. And in fact, I think I'm still pissed off about it to this day. So we had to turn out something really good, and we did. And I think it still pisses people off, because, and they can't say it especially in this modern day era, but let me just bang the drum for her. No story had beaten Judge Dredd before her episode of Slaine. So this is a woman who's not part of the comic scene. She doesn't know anything about comics, and she's not the usual gender, and she has a #1 hit. And does anyone ever talk about her? Do they fuck? You know, and you can see it still pisses me off today. Anyway, that's enough of that. And then on to Bisley. What was the question? What was it like working?
How was it working with him?
Yeah, it's classic Bisley, I think, really. Whatever you're imagining is probably true. He'd done ABC Warriors with me, and then he went on to do Slaine. So I guess that's what we're talking about. And he was taking Slaine to this new fucking level. And it's like, my God, I'm looking at Frazetta. Jesus Christ, this is amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I'm thinking, Christ, where are we going? Now, I'd written the story already as a synopsis, I think, because to begin with, I wasn't even aware, I wasn't sure it was going to be Simon who was going to do it. And I wasn't sure it was going to be in color. So I'd written the story. It was very much a heart-filled story. It was about, it had a kind of feminist subtext and all that kind of stuff. And suddenly it's given this Frazetta feeling, which is great. And Simon was fine with that kind of subtext. But some of these fans weren't. Lobo didn't exist yet, but they wanted Slaine to be like Lobo. And you know, my answer to them then and now is, fuck you, you know, in other words, go fuck yourselves. Yeah, which is what Lobo would say to them, right? In other words, they wanted Slaine to reflect that Lobo aspect of Simon's personality and his art. But Simon is also, although that is Simon, you know, he is the heavy metal drummer and all the rest of it, but he's also an incredibly subtle and sophisticated guy. And you see that particularly in the early episodes of The Horn God. And it's still there later, but you can see Lobo is trying to get out. And of course, eventually Lobo does get out. That's a summary of it. We could come back to that another time.
And he also asked, how did the project of your autobiography, Be Pure, Be Vigilant, Behave, 2000 AD, and Judge Dredd, The Secret History came to be?
I think I started, I think blogging has really opened up all kinds of possibilities and self-publishing. And this is the thing, that in the past, we were always bogged down by, can we get, that was it. Years ago, I had suggested with an agent actually as well, that I would do a history of comics. And various publishers considered it, and it got turned down. And so I had the embryonic story already and self-published it, and I can tell you it's sold really bloody well. It's very, very successful. So I'm really chuffed about that. What does that tell you about publishers? What the fuck do they know? You know what I mean? Publish yourself. If you believe in something, go for it.
Mm-hmm. Felipe tells La Berenjena Atómica, if you get the chance to go to the Bovington Tank Museum in Dorset, they have some artwork on display and you can see some of the machinery. There you go.
Yeah, and on that subject, I have actually been to the Tank Museum and I did a talk on Charlie's War there. And I think I think Joe's daughter and was there and so on. So I'm very familiar with the Tank Museum. It's a great place.
Mm-hmm. Then Insider says about Elon Musk, he also invented PayPal to get faster comics online.
I saw that, yeah. What can I say?
Yeah. Super thanks for your work, he says. And then Michael Lightfoot says, hey, Pat, going from 2000 AD to Crisis when I was 11 years old was pretty confusing.
Yeah. That's the point, Michael. Yeah. It must have been confusing. Sorry about that.
That's life, eh? You evolve, you get old, you know. What happens. Drink and Draw Costa Rica, thank you for your insight on British comics and history. This is one of the most productive conversations I've experienced. Thank you, sir, very much. Welcome. You're welcome at Costa Rica anytime you want.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. And I hear great things about Costa Rica. So who knows? I might well take you up on that. Thank you.
As I always say, Drink and Draw Costa Rica, when you say that to my guests, if you pay for it, we'll all go to Costa Rica.
Yeah, we'll both turn up there, yeah?
There you go. Felipe Abreu says, thanks for a great interview. Chat again. Pat and David, I have to go now. And we both have to go now, too, because I got to the end of the questions. And we've been at this for 2 hours and 50 minutes. And Lisa's going to kill you. Me, and my wife and my daughter are going to kill me. Shut up, see. So since we don't want to die, we're going to live here.
All
so
right.
Please don't cut Pat, because I want to say proper thank you to you after we're off the live chat.
All right.
To all of you, thank you so much for being here. On Wednesday, we'll be here with Alberto Alburquerque and Rodrigo Zayas in Spanish. As you know, I do both things. And to all of you, thank you for being here. Wear your mask. Don't be assholes. Don't trust Elon Musk. I'm kidding. Or not. And take care of yourself. And to you, Pat, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, David. And thanks, everybody, for listening. It was a really great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, they have. Believe me, they have. They love this. And we're off. Thank you so much again, everybody. We're off in 3,